And girls, we're going to read The Boston Tea Party by Pamela Duncan Edwards. It's kind of a picture book that explains a very historical event that has implications on our book, My Brother Sam is Dead, and of course, the Revolutionary War. All right, so here we go. The Boston Tea Party. Dun, dun, dun. Pamela Duncan Edwards. Has really, really pretty illustrations. Illustrated by Henry Cole. Got to give him props. Now, as we're reading, think about connections you can make to our novel. And it's dedicated to Janie West, a devoted teacher. These are the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the Boston Tea Party. And there's little mice at the bottom, and the mice only pick the new shoots. They're the ones that get sent to the factory to be made into tea. My Uncle Bert is a great traveler. He says the tea grows in places other than India, like China and Africa. Who needs tea? Where's the cheese? You always have one goof off, right? Okay, so we have locations of where the tea is grown. Do you remember the countries? What were they? Shout them out. Good. What's another one? Africa. Good. And India. Great memory, Bryce. Okay, this tea, this is the tea that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the Boston Tea Party. Pretty chinaware right there. Nice teapot and teacups. And what are our little mice friends saying? I love tea. It's everyone's favorite drink in the colonies. And perfect with a nice slice of cheese. This is the king on his English throne who declared, tax the tea! I should use a British accent. Tax the tea! That was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the Boston Tea Party. And we've got a little mouse here saying, 3 cheers for George III, King of England and all her colonies. But we need more money to run the empire. I say, let's tax the Americans for the sugar and the tea they import. Is that fair? I don't know. We've got some people who aren't really sure yet. So these are the colonists who cried no to the king on his throne, who declared, tax the tea, and was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the Boston Tea Party. So they're putting notices up on the oak trees and all around so people know they are going to be taxed. We have all kinds of rodents that have joined the conversation here at the bottom of our page. So first they taxed us under the Sugar Act, then they made us pay tax for tea with the Townshend Acts. We're not going to take it. No taxation without... Anybody? Anybody? No taxation without... You said it. Go ahead. It's okay. Yeah, let's say it again. No taxation without... Yeah, we're still kind of sleepy this morning. Did you hear they've sent soldiers to stop us rebelling? So which soldiers did they send to stop the rebellion? Which are the which soldiers? Lobsterbacks or the British, right? They've also sent, they're all the same type of soldiers. They're all coming from England to put the rebels in place. Let's stop using British tea. We'll smuggle in cheaper tea from Holland. Are they taxing cheese too? This is the cargo being carried in the ships to the shores of the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king on his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea!" that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the Boston. Yep. Here are little mice hanging out right on the harbor. Look, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver are about to set sail. And I think that's the Dartmouth. It says mouth, but I think they pronounce it in England, myth, the Dartmouth. They are going to Boston with tea from the British East India Company. So where did that tea come from if it was from the East India Company? Yeah, from India, exactly. You guys are being so shy now that I'm recording, I see. You're not used to me recording. It's okay, you can shout out. These are the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in the ships to the shores of the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king of his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea!" that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the
Boston Tea Party.
That's more like it. Sam and John Adams have called a meeting. Paul Revere, Joseph Warren, and John Hancock are all here. Hurrah! The Sons of Liberty will know what to do. Well, did they have cheese for supper? And here, that's a really cool picture. To me, this picture just invites you to be in the room with them, to hear the conversations, the discussions, the seriousness of what's going on, and the impact that these gentlemen had. It's just incredible. And of course, there aren't any lights on the wall. Do you guys know why?
No electricity.
Exactly. Luckily, we didn't lose electricity. How many of you did lose electricity from yesterday's ice storm?
I lost electricity literally 14 times.
Oh my goodness, I'm so impressed that you're here and on time, Angel. Okay, these are the disguises worn by the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in the ships to the shores of the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king on his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea!" that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far away land and became part of the
Boston Tea Party.
Dressing up as Mohawks will fool the British. And if you zoom in, maybe Lily can show the people, they're dressing up as Native Americans. Yeah, now they're not actually making a Mohawk. That's what we consider. A Mohawk was a type of Indian then. We'll sneak on board and surprise the sailors. Well, make sure you don't dump any cheese by mistake. See, and you can tell the men here are dressing up.
The mice all care about the cheese, while everybody else is worried about the food.
Right, the laws and fairness and representation. So here we have the sailors on the ship, and then we have the men dressed up as Mohawks, the type of Native American, and then over here we have our little mice in their own conversation. It's like the story here and then a subplot here. These are the sailors scared by disguises worn by the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in the ships to the shores of the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king on his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea!" that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a faraway land and became part of the Boston
Tea Party.
Surprise! They're not fighting back. I think they know the tea tax isn't fair. Are there any cats on board? So this is the harbor. Stained dark brown. Remember, the harbor is that water. Stained dark brown. Why would it be stained dark brown? Yeah, think about what tea does to the cups that you put, your tea in. It stains the color, right? This is the harbor, stained dark brown like a giant teapot. shouted the sailors, scared by disguises worn by the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in the ships to the shores of the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king on his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the
Boston Tea Party.
Yes, the Boston Tea Party. And our little guys down here, let's see their little conversations. We were forced to take action. The British were not being fair to us. Cheese overboard! Now, the cool thing about this is I know we often associate dialogue that these mice are having. It should be in quotation marks, right? The dialogue. But because they're in little speech clouds, that's kind of substituting the entire idea of quotation marks. There's no he said, she said, and all of that. It just comes directly from the mice, right? So being that it comes directly from the mice, we know that's what they're saying with those little speech bubbles. It kind of replaces our quotation marks. Does that make sense? So that's why you don't see those when you go back and read this book on your own. Okay, these are the tea chests, 340 in number, which bobbed in the harbor, stained dark brown like a giant teapot, shouted the sailors, scared by disguises worn by the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in ships to the shores on the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king on his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a faraway land and became part of the
Boston Tea Party.
Yes. And then we've got our little guys down here. It's a really pretty picture. The depth of this illustration, boys and girls. You can see the mice hanging out in the teacups in the foreground. In the middle ground, we have the boxes of the tea floating in the harbor. And in the background, what do we have?
Ships.
Just a silhouette of the ships, right? Really neat style of art that really puts it into perspective for us. Remember the perspective we did at the beginning of the year? What was the book we used for our drawings? Good memory. Yes, Hey Little Ant. And the perspective kept changing, or the point of view kept changing. Okay, let's keep on going. These are the soldiers who fought for freedom, remembering the tea chest, 340 in number, which bobbed in the harbor, stained dark brown. Like a giant teapot, shouted the sailors, scared by disguises worn by the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in ships to the shores of the colonists who cried, "No!" to the king on his English throne who declared, "Tax the tea that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a far-off land and became part of the Boston Tea Party." And then our little characters down at the bottom. The redcoats are coming. We're ready for them. We tried to get the British to listen to our requests, but they wouldn't. The time has come. We want to run our own country. We will fight for our freedom. And then the last little mouse carrying a flag that says liberty. Liberty means what, boys and girls? Freedom. Give me liberty, or give me? Yes. These are the Americans. Now we're changing the term, right? Was rebels and patriots, and now they're Americans. These are the Americans, independent and free, who honor the soldiers who fought for freedom. Now, you can tell on this page, we have fast forward in time. If we had a timeline, we'd go from the 1700s, skip 2 centuries, into the 1900s, right? Or the 20th century. How do we know we are in the 20th century and not the 18th century? Angel, how do we know?
Because they're the clothing.
Beautiful, good clue to infer we are no longer in the 18th century. Tyler, how else?
There's also in the background there's buildings.
Very, very insightful. There are buildings. Do they have these kind of sky-rise buildings in the 18th century? Or even the 19th century? No. And what's inside of those buildings that help us infer we're in the 20th century? Lights. Very good. We have electricity in this illustration. So I'll start again. These are the Americans, independent and free, who honor the soldiers who fought for freedom, remembering tea chests, 340 in number, which bobbled in the harbor, stained dark brown like a giant teapot, shouted the sailors, scared by disguises worn by the patriots who made plans to dump the cargo being carried in the ships to the shores of the colonists who cried no to the king on his English throne, who declared, tax the tea that was made from the leaves that grew on a bush in a faraway land and became part of the Boston Tea Party. Whew, there's a lot of repetition there, isn't there, boys and girls? I know you read a lot more books like this when you were younger, but there is a lot of repetition, and the reason I like this book is it helps you really lock in memory of what the Boston Tea Party was all about. Now, if you'll notice on this last page, it's a ribbon, but in this ribbon is a what? Timeline. Beautiful. We have a timeline, which is a sequence of events. So at the end of this Google Meet lesson we're having today, boys and girls, I will let the kids in class just look through the timeline, get familiar with it. If you'd like to take any notes on it to add to your Boston Tea Party novel notebook page, you feel free to do so and then pass it on. Okay? So we have finished our book, and hopefully now you know more about our history, our American history, and what led to the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War. And a big part was the what? Boston Tea Party. Why was there revolt against the tea? Beautiful. They didn't want taxes. They were tired of taxing, and they were tired of taxation without. Beautiful. Now, what that means in our terms is they were having to pay taxes. It would be like me going to get this cup of coffee, right? And say I paid, I don't know. Okay, for the cup of coffee, and I had to pay 10 cents tax, so that would be 70 cents. That'd be $7.70 that I would pay for this, which is fine if I know what the money is going to be used for. And today we know mostly some of our taxes go to pay for roads, for police, for teachers, beautiful, for, well, maintenance along the roads. Yep, you're right. For government workers. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that our taxes are used for.
Disability people.
Right, people who are disabled, people who aren't able to work, and we help them until they can get back on their feet and go back to work so they can contribute to society. But we want to help them until they can, right? We want to give a helping hand to each other. Now just imagine you paid that 70 cents on your tea and whatever else, but none of it is being used for you in your own town. It's being sent back to, say, you know, we'll say England or Mexico or Canada. So you continue to pay, you continue to pay, but you are not benefiting. That's what they mean by no taxation without representation. Okay, very good. So, boys and girls, today is our lesson is going to be to get to know the colonies that helped during the Revolutionary War.